He leaned over in the passenger seat, right as I was pulling into the parking garage, and said, "Just stay close to me tonight and let me do most of the talking. These are serious people, medical people. You'll probably feel a bit out of your depth." I didn't say anything. I just turned off the ignition and watched the overhead light in the car go dark. My husband had been saying things like that for so long I almost didn't hear them anymore. They blended into the background noise of our marriage, the way traffic sounds blend into city living. Constant, unremarkable, something you stop noticing until the day you suddenly do. I had met him when I was 31. I was finishing my residency at a teaching hospital in Toronto, surviving on 4 hours of sleep and bad coffee from the third-floor vending machine. He was charming in a way that felt like oxygen when you've been holding your breath. He asked good questions on our first date. He laughed easily. He made me feel, for the first time in years, like I was something more than a function, more than the job, the schedule, the endless responsibility. What I didn't notice then, or maybe what I chose not to notice, was that he asked good questions, but never really listened to the answers. We got married 2 years later. I wore my mother's earrings. We danced to a song we both liked. I thought that was enough to build something on. It wasn't. By the time that night happened, the night in the parking garage in downtown Vancouver, we had been married for 6 years. 6 years during which I had quietly built a career that I was genuinely proud of. 6 years during which my husband had, just as quietly, decided that my career was a kind of hobby. Something I did because I needed to feel busy. Something that was fine as long as it didn't inconvenience him or embarrass him or take up too much space at dinner parties. He worked in pharmaceutical sales. He was good at it. He made decent money and he wore it well. The suits, the confidence, the practiced handshake. He moved through professional rooms like he had been born knowing the layout. I moved through them differently, more quietly. He had always read that as uncertainty. It wasn't. The event that night was the annual gala for the BC Children's Hospital Foundation. It was held every year at a ballroom in one of the hotels on West Georgia Street. The kind of space with high ceilings and chandeliers and waitstaff in white gloves carrying trays of things you didn't recognize but ate anyway. Tickets were expensive. The room was always full of donors, board members, hospital administrators, and physicians who had done something worth celebrating. My husband had been invited through a colleague, a contact of his who sat on some committee somewhere. He had mentioned it 3 weeks earlier over dinner. Very casually, the way you mention a dentist appointment. "It's on Thursday, by the way. Clear your schedule." I said I'd be there. He had seemed surprised that I didn't ask more questions, and then he had moved on and started talking about something else, and I had let him, because by that point in our marriage I had learned that some things were easier to let unfold on their own. What he didn't know, what he had never thought to ask, was that I had been one of the 3 honorees at that gala for the past 2 months. I'm a pediatric cardiologist. I have been for 8 years. I completed my fellowship at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto and then moved back to Vancouver, where I grew up, to take a position at BC Children's Hospital. Over the past 4 years, I had been part of a team working on a minimally invasive procedure for a specific type of congenital heart defect in newborns. The results had been significant enough that the procedure was now being adopted by hospitals in 4 other provinces. The foundation had decided to recognize our team's work at the gala. I had been told by the foundation chair in September. I had thanked her and said I was looking forward to it. I had confirmed my attendance 3 times over email. I had not told my husband. This is the part of the story where I know some people will say I should have, and honestly, I understand that. I've thought about it. But here is what I want you to understand first. I had told him. Not about the gala specifically, but about the work, about the procedure, about the team. I had tried over 4 years to explain what we were doing and why it mattered, in the same way I tried to explain most things about my professional life. And every single time, he would nod for about 40 seconds and then redirect the conversation to something he was more comfortable with, his territory, his world. I stopped trying after a while. Not out of bitterness, but out of exhaustion. There is only so many times a person can attempt a door before they accept that it isn't going to open. So when the Gala invitation arrived, and I saw my name printed on the program that the foundation mailed to me, third on the list, under the heading Honorary Recipients, I read it twice, put it in my desk drawer at work, and said nothing at home. The weeks leading up to the gala were unremarkable except for one thing. My husband became very focused on how I would present myself that night. It started with a comment about my hair. We were eating breakfast on a Saturday morning, and he mentioned very casually that I should consider doing something different with it before the event. Something more polished. More put together. I looked up from my coffee. More put together than what? Than the way you usually look, he said. At these kinds of things, first impressions matter. I didn't respond. I drank my coffee. He kept eating. A few days later, he suggested I look for a new dress. Something classic, he said. Not too flashy, but appropriate for a formal event. He mentioned a boutique in Yaletown he had walked past once. He seemed genuinely pleased with himself for remembering it. I thanked him and went back to the chart I was reviewing. The Thursday before the gala, he made an appointment for me at a salon on Robson Street without asking me first. He texted me the confirmation details during my lunch break between a patient debrief and a surgical consult. He said he thought it would be a nice treat. I stared at my phone for a long moment, then I texted back a simple thank you and went back to work. In the car on the night of the gala, as I navigated into the parking garage, he had smoothed his jacket and said, "You look nice, by the way." The dress was a good choice. It was a simple black dress I had bought 12 years ago. I wore it because it fit, and because I liked the way it felt, and because I had significantly more important things on my mind that evening than my dress. "Thank you," I said. He checked his reflection in the visor mirror, adjusted his tie, put the visor back up. "I'm going to introduce us to a few people early in the evening," he said. "Get some visibility before the formal part starts. Just follow my lead and we should be able to work the room pretty efficiently." I nodded. We took the elevator up and I thought about my mother, the way I often do before something that matters. She had been a nurse for 31 years. She used to say that the rooms that felt the most intimidating were always the ones where you already belonged. The ballroom was warm and full. The lights were low and golden. A string quartet was playing something I didn't recognize near the windows. There were round tables with white linens and small floral arrangements in the BC Children's Hospital colours. And at the front of the room there was a long stage with a podium and a backdrop printed with the foundation logo. I recognized 2 of the hospital's department heads immediately. I recognized the foundation chair. I recognized the chief of pediatrics who had written one of my early research references. I recognized 2 of my colleagues from the cardiology unit who were already seated and waving at me from across the room. My husband was scanning the space with the focused energy of someone at a networking event. He put his hand on the small of my back, a gesture that was more about optics than warmth, and steered me toward a cluster of people near the bar. "I'll get us drinks," he said. "Stay put." I stood for a moment, alone, watching the room. A woman I recognized from the Foundation's communications team saw me and immediately changed direction, weaving through the crowd toward me with the kind of purposeful warmth that tells you someone has been looking for you specifically. "You made it," she said, and she hugged me the way you hug someone you've emailed with 40 times and finally get to meet in person. We were starting to wonder. "Dr. Ashworth mentioned you might be running late from the hospital." "Traffic on the bridge," I said. "Nothing unusual." She laughed. She handed me a small folder, the evening program, and pointed to where my team was seated, up near the front on the left. She told me the remarks would begin at 8 and that we'd be asked to come up around 8:40. She asked if I needed anything. I told her I was fine. I thanked her. She squeezed my arm and moved on. My husband came back with 2 glasses of white wine. He handed me one and looked at the folder in my hands. "What's that?" "The program for the evening." He glanced at it without real interest. Then he tilted his head toward a group of people near the podium. "That man over there is one of the senior VPs from Meridian Health. I've been trying to get a meeting with him for 6 months. This could be the right moment." He said this the way someone says, "I see a parking spot," quickly, before it disappears. "Of course," I said. "Go ahead." He gave me a brief look, like he was checking whether I was going to be fine on my own, which I found very nearly funny. Then he walked toward the VP with his hand already extended. I made my way to the front table. My colleagues stood when they saw me coming. Dr. Mir Ashworth, a thoracic surgeon who had been part of our team since year 1, put his arm around my shoulder and said, "We thought we'd have to send someone to get you." His wife smiled and pulled out the chair beside her. I sat down and I was, for the first time that day, completely at ease. My husband found his way to us about 20 minutes later. He'd been doing what he did best, moving through rooms, collecting handshakes, leaving impressions. He pulled up a chair and inserted himself into the table with comfortable authority. He shook hands with the people around him and introduced himself with the smooth confidence of someone who does not experience social discomfort. Dr. Ashworth extended his hand and said, "Good to finally meet you. I've heard a lot about you." My husband smiled. "Likewise. Are you connected to the foundation?" "In a way," Dr. Ashworth said with a glance at me that I caught and he caught and no one else at the table caught. "Tonight, mostly." "You," my husband explained his connection. "The colleague. The committee." He spoke for about 3 minutes about the pharmaceutical industry, about the importance of events like this for the sector, about his own recent work. Dr. Ashworth nodded politely. Halfway through the main course, the foundation chair stepped up to the podium. The room quieted. She thanked the donors, the board, the hospital's leadership team. She described the past year's fundraising milestones. Her voice was measured and warm, and the room stayed with her the whole time. Then she said, "This year we're particularly proud to recognize 3 individuals whose work directly shapes the outcomes of children in our province." She began with the first honoree, a pediatric oncologist from Victoria who had started a research bursary in his late wife's name. The room applauded. He stood briefly and nodded. The second was a donor, a retired woman from the Okanagan who had, over 30 years, quietly given more than $2 million to the hospital. The room applauded again. She waved from her table with one hand and dabbed her eye with the other. "Our third honoree," the foundation chair said, and I felt my heart rate do something specific that it only does in certain moments, "is a physician whose team has pioneered a procedure that has already changed outcomes for infants born with a significant cardiac defect. Her work has been adopted by hospitals across Canada, and we are deeply honored to call her one of our own. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Laurel Voss." The room applauded. I stood. I felt my husband's stillness before I saw his face. I didn't look at him right away. I walked toward the stage the way I always do things, with focus, without hurry. I shook the foundation chair's hand. She leaned in and said quietly, "We're so glad you're here." I stood at the podium and I looked out at the room full of people, and I said what I had prepared to say, which wasn't very long because I've never believed in taking more time than necessary. I thanked the team. I thanked the families who had trusted us. I talked about what the research had cost and what it had been worth. I said that medicine was mostly about deciding to try something before you know if it will work, and that the courage in this room, the donors, the board, the foundation, made that possible. The room was quiet, in the way that rooms are quiet when people are actually listening. Then they applauded, and I walked back to my table. I sat down. I looked at my husband for the first time since I'd stood up. He was holding his wine glass and he was staring at the stage, and his face had the look of a man who has just realized, in a single moment, the full dimension of something he has been wrong about for a very long time. He turned to me. I met his eyes and I waited. "You didn't tell me," he said. His voice was very quiet. I did, actually, I said. I've told you about this work for 4 years. He opened his mouth and closed it. Dr. Ashworth's wife, who had heard none of this, leaned over and said to him warmly, "You must be so proud of her." He looked at her. He looked at me. He said, "Yes, the way you say a word when you're not sure what it means anymore." The rest of the evening passed the way evenings pass when something has shifted, and both people in a partnership know it, and neither of them is ready to address it out loud yet. He was quiet on the drive home. I drove because I had not had a second glass of wine, and he had had 3. He looked out the window at the city moving past. I watched the road. When we got home, he sat on the couch for a while without turning on the television. I made tea. I stood in the kitchen and I let the kettle boil, and I thought about what the foundation chair had said to me months ago when she called to tell me about the recognition. People like you tend to work in the background, but the work doesn't stay quiet forever. She was right about that. My husband came to stand in the kitchen doorway. He looked tired. He looked like something had been knocked loose inside him, and he wasn't sure how to put it back. "Why didn't you say something?" he asked. "About being honored? About any of it?" I poured the water into my mug. I thought about how to answer honestly without being cruel. "Because you never asked," I said. "You've never once asked me what I was working on, not in a way that was waiting for an answer." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's not fair." "Okay," I said. He waited for me to say more. I didn't. I took my tea and I went to sit by the window in the living room, the way I did every night, looking out at the street below, the way the lights from other apartments reflected off the wet November pavement. He did not follow me. That was October of the year before last. The divorce was finalized 11 months later, which is fast by any standard, but we had no children together, and the financials were relatively uncomplicated. I owned my condo before we married, and it had stayed in my name, which is the part of the story I am most grateful to my 31-year-old self for insisting on. He left. He moved into an apartment in Burnaby. We exchanged the necessary documents through lawyers. We were civil because there was no reason not to be, and also because we had always been better at politeness than we were at honesty. He called me once, about 2 months before the papers were signed. He said he had been doing a lot of thinking. He said he realized he had not been paying attention. He said he was sorry. I told him I believed him. He asked if there was any possibility of reconsidering. I thanked him for the call. I told him I hoped he was well. Then I said goodbye in the quiet, certain way that closes a door, and I hung up. That evening I sat in my condo with my tea and the lights of English Bay visible through the window, and I thought about what it meant to be known by the people you share a life with. I thought about the families I had met in the cardiac unit over the years, the parents who sat in the hallway waiting for news, who memorized every word I said, who asked questions that were sometimes hard to answer. I thought about how those strangers in the worst moments of their lives had paid more attention to who I was than my husband had in 6 years. I'm not angry about it anymore. I was for a while. But anger is expensive, and I have a full life. My team is currently 2 years into a follow-up study. The numbers are good. I have a standing Wednesday dinner with 2 friends I've known since medical school. I run along the seawall on weekends when the rain lets up, which in Vancouver is occasionally. I adopted a cat last spring, grey, deeply unimpressed by most things, perfect company. I do not spend a lot of time thinking about what my husband saw in that ballroom or what it cost him to understand it. I think about the work. I think about the next patient and the one after that. I think about the foundation chair's words sometimes. When I'm tired or when something is hard, the work doesn't stay quiet forever. Neither do the people doing it. There's a moment in that ballroom I keep coming back to, not the applause, not the podium, not even the look on my husband's face when he realized what he hadn't known. It's the moment just before I stood up, that split second where I felt completely still inside, while everything around me was about to shift. I've thought a lot about what brought me to that room. Not the invitation, not the research, not the years of work, but the actual shape of the path. Because nothing about that evening was accidental. Every outcome had a cause, and most of the causes had been building quietly for years in both directions. My husband was not a cruel man. I want to be clear about that. He was someone who had simply never been asked to pay attention, and so he never learned how. His assumptions about me came from the same place. A lot of assumptions come from, not malice, but the comfort of never being challenged. He moved through our marriage the way some people move through life, efficiently, confidently, and without much curiosity about what they might be missing. That is its own kind of cost. He paid it on that October evening in front of a room full of people, and I genuinely did not take pleasure in it, even though I understand why others might. What I do believe, looking back, is that the way we treat the people closest to us eventually becomes the full record of who we are, not the job title or the number of handshakes or the contacts in the phone. The record is what we actually did with our attention, whether we listened, whether we asked, whether we showed up to the lives of the people we said we loved. I showed up to my work every day for 8 years because it mattered, and because the families waiting in those hospital corridors deserved nothing less than everything I had. That kind of commitment isn't glamorous. It doesn't make for good dinner conversation, apparently, but it is real, and it accumulates, and eventually it stands in a ballroom and is called by name. What I learned about myself through all of this is that integrity doesn't require an audience. I didn't stay quiet at home because I was ashamed of my work. I stayed quiet because I had already tried to share it, and I had made peace with the fact that some people are not capable of receiving what they haven't made space for. Choosing not to force that door every single day, that wasn't defeat. That was a decision about where to spend my energy. And then there is the matter of simply continuing, of going back to the hospital the morning after a difficult conversation, and the morning after that, and the one after that. Not because it's easy, but because the work is real and the patients are real, and no amount of domestic unhappiness changes that equation. That kind of steadiness, the unglamorous kind, the kind that doesn't post about itself, is what actually carries a life forward. Dr. Cadigri's A Life Forward. Ashworth said to me once, early in our research, that the procedure would only work if we trusted the data over our own expectations. I think about that now in a broader sense. The data of my own life was there the whole time. I just had to trust it enough to keep going. The seawall is quiet on weekend mornings. My cat is deeply unimpressed by my accomplishments, which I find grounding. The work continues. That is enough. That has always been enough.